There have been a lot of points in our marriage that have been exceedingly painful on account of an inability to communicate with one another. Those are the circumstances I'm referring to when I say no one can hurt you as much as your spouse, because your spouse is where it really matters and where you really desire to be seen and received. Difficulties in listening and communication sometimes constitute the most extremely painful moments in your marriage. And it's really worth working through them, doing the work that it takes to try to understand why were we not able to communicate to our spouse? Why was our spouse not able to listen?
Hi, I'm John Cutterback.
And I'm Sofia Cutterback.
If you're wondering whether you can really be friends with your spouse
And raise children into responsible adults with whom you have a relationship.
and do what it takes to make a homestead, reconnecting with your body and the land wherever you live,
If you just want to think more about how to make a truly happy home in our trying times,
then the Intentional Household, a LifeCraft podcast, is for you. Join us. Two sides of listening in marriage. This is going to be a little different here today. My wife's already having a good time here. Great to be with Sofia, as always. We're going to shake things up a little bit. I honestly feel like this was an inspiration. I was thinking, this is going to be something great I really enjoy talking about. And then I just thought, what if we just simply do this way? Each of us share two things, and it's the same two things in the sense, same kind of two things, or answer two questions. What do we wish that we had realized earlier about ourselves, about how we could have been better at listening? So it's I as the man, husband. What was I not doing that I've learned in marriage that I need to do to listen better? And then you give one of those. What have you learned that you could do better? If you can think of anything, dear.
it's going to be hard.
And then on the other side, then what do I wish is a little more dicey. What do I wish my spouse had done? What has it become kind of clear to me over the years? I'm sure you're not going to have a problem on this one. What would have helped me if my spouse did this in listening?
Oh, this is going to be interesting.
I think obviously every marriage is unique. But I mean, I start out by thinking, obviously, kind of natural difference between man and woman, things that are challenging for men in this whole area. And I thought maybe we could have talked about that. But I think some of those important things will come up. But I think this is a nice context for it. I think for us doing it that way. So who do you think should go first?
I'm happy to go first if you'd like me to go first.
All right,
Except
now,
for maybe I would just say, why don't we do like and like? So
I
first,
agree.
Instead of each one of us do both of them, right?
Right. Well, I think it would be fitting, and I'm not saying this because you're going first. I was going to say, we'll start with saying, what have we learned about what we could have done before we talk about what we would have liked to get from the other, receive from the other. So if you're willing to go first, then this is you answering the question, what have you learned that you could have done better in listening to your spouse in marriage?
Yeah. Maybe before I answer that question directly, I just maybe would love to share what I wish someone had told me when we first started out in the process of communication, which is, of course, listening, speaking and listening, right? And I kind of, when I look back, because I think it would have changed what I'm about to say about what I feel like I could have done better in listening. I wish someone had just told me that this is a long-term process of communication. So it's sometimes, especially very early on in our marriage, every kind of miscommunication, meaning I say something and I perceive that you're not listening, or you say something, you perceive I'm not listening, was fraught with this kind of high stakes anxiety. My gosh, he doesn't get it. Oh my gosh, he's not hearing me. And a kind of a panic ensued. If I could have, now, of course, this is a little bit speaking in hindsight, because at the beginning, you are kind of going, oh my gosh, what if I made a terrible mistake? This is permanent. And now, of course, looking back, I have the benefit of looking back for 30 years and going, it wasn't a mistake. It's been hard, but it's clear that this is what we're supposed to do. Would it have made a difference if someone had said to me, this is a long-term process of learning to communicate with your spouse? Possibly, I would have loved to have somebody. So if someone had said that to me, would I possibly have just not understood? Would that have changed it for me?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Can we hear that at that point?
Exactly, because it's so much an issue of what are we able to hear and process. But in any case, I think it would have been a very fruitful kind of encouragement from a more seasoned wife or even husband or couple to have spoken into my early marriage saying, communication is very hard and it takes a lot from both of you. And both of you have to learn something because we're talking about communication between spouses, which has a lot of similar characteristics to regular communication, but then has its own set of kind of
Right.
conditions that make it a little bit different from standard communication. And just have someone say, it's going to be hard. It's going to take both of you being patient with one another and really working on it and have courage. It's worth the effort because of what you have on the other end. So I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I kind of wish that someone had said that to me at the
Can I
beginning.
just interject a word of agreement? And, and just also note that sometimes it's worth saying things that we don't think can be fully heard, but you just register them anyway. And then it's in, I mean, obviously there's always that judgment. You don't say way too much. I mean, there are certain things you hold in reserve or whatever, but I don't think we should not have someone should have said such a thing and
Mhm.
not held back thinking, well,
Just because I couldn't
they're not
understand.
really going to
Yeah.
get this right now.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
matter whether we really get it, it just alerts us. So I
Mhm.
completely agree with that.
Yeah. So, okay. So that, having said that, what do I wish that I had done differently in art? Where do I see myself lacking in my ability to listen to you, or when I have failed in listening to you? What kind of is the flashpoint for me? First of all, it was something I already mentioned in kind of the pre-comment, that I realized that often I was listening to you. In general, I think of myself as a very good listener. I've listened to your words, but I've also listened to what you were saying when you didn't use words. So I think in general, women tend to be better at that than men. And so I give myself a check mark for that. But I do want to make a distinction between listening and hearing, or maybe listening and receiving. So I feel like while I was doing a good job listening to you, I'm not sure that I always understood what you were saying. First of all, there was a little bit of a anxiety or panic. What if he doesn't hear me? What if we can't make this work out? What if we can't fix it? And that anxiety and nervousness, I think, got in the way of my being able to really listen to you. So that was one thing that I feel like I could have done better if I hadn't been so anxious about how the communication was going to go, so to
Hmm.
speak. But also, I feel like something that I wish that I had done differently, I'm realizing that's still something I very much need to work on, is appreciating the difference between men and women. So I think I was listening to you and I was really hearing your words, and I was really committed to hear you and meet your needs. I just often was misinterpreting what you were saying because I was seeing it through the filter of being a woman. So not being able to sufficiently appreciate the difference between man and woman, and therefore hearing your words, but actually misinterpreting them, because if someone were saying that from a woman's perspective, it would mean something kind of different. So I feel like fundamentally my issue wasn't really with the mechanism of listening, but what was I doing with the words that you were saying? And I realized that I was putting them through my own filter rather than just trying to use them to just fully understand what you were trying to tell me about yourself. I wasn't aware of that, but
Hmm.
now I realize in
Hmm.
retrospect that so many times when our communication went poorly, that I was listening to you, but I was giving your words my own interpretation because I wasn't sufficiently hearing them coming from you as a man.
Well, this is very interesting. And by the way, we haven't told each other what
Yeah, this is
our
actually going to be
answers
a
are to
surprise.
these two questions, and we're interested to see to what extent they kind of align from the opposite sides, as it were. And maybe it'd be fitting because we only have kind of one of each.
Hmm.
That although we could always throw in another as we go, that maybe we should just respond and just kind of say what is our kind of experience from the other
Yeah.
side of what you're saying.
Did you
And
experience
I
it that
mean,
way when that was happening?
I mean, I have to say, I don't think I ever consciously really thought, wow, I'm just not being seen. I'm just not being heard. But it is interesting to me that I think that by and large, a man, and again, maybe I'm wrong. So maybe there I shouldn't universalize myself into a man, but I think that it might, and you just kind of notice these things and you talk to other people. And so, speaking in a case just for myself, I wasn't terribly worried about how the communication was going to go. It's
Mm.
interesting to hear, and you have expressed that to me before, but it's interesting, to hear you say again, you were worried. And I think there's actually something very, very important there, that strikes me. You and I have had this conversation. In an important sense, in some sense, a woman gives up more when she gets married, more kind of separates herself from the rest of the world,
Mm.
and her world tends to more narrow, and she tends not to have, it's not always the case, but tends not to have as much outside the home contact. And um, I think that actually means that a woman, understandably, would have a little bit more fear. If
Yeah.
my husband doesn't hear me,
Who's going to hear me?
who's going to hear me?
Sure.
I'll just kind
Yeah.
of be alone here in, as it were, in some sense, this man's house while he's
Hmm.
going out. Not that's not your
Hmm.
house too, but I mean, you might
Hmm.
experience that way a little bit. So, and you were feeling that very nervousness. You have this heightened awareness of kind of like, how's our communication going?
Hmm.
Interestingly, you're saying in some sense that actually undermined it a little bit.
Hmm.
I think, and there's a kind of undermining coming from the other side. This isn't my own point yet, but of my not being very attentive to that and not being concerned about it, just
Hmm.
kind of assumed everything was going to be fine.
Hmm.
And that itself is probably a little bit of a problem. But I don't feel that I certainly wasn't aware of, gosh, I'm not being understood as a man. But then again, in your saying this, it does bring out more how I have felt more that way as our marriage has gone on. And so
Hmm.
now listening to what you're saying, I can kind of project back. There was an important aspect of me that wasn't being seen slash
Hmm.
heard. And sometimes there can be a wound that is an unconscious wound, but it makes a difference. And I think it's probably fair to say that there was a little bit of that there, but I'm not trying to make a problem where there was no problem. I think the reality is you were probably a little bit more concerned about the situation. And you're saying you hadn't yet realized, gosh, there's going to be that big difference between man and woman. I certainly
Yeah.
hadn't realized that. And I wasn't really particularly aware or concerned at all.
Although I wonder that part of the thing that compounded our difficulties in communication early on was the fact that I was a very good listener. And so if there were times that you were speaking and you were feeling like somehow you weren't heard, that might have been confusing for you. And you might have just gone, I'm sure I've been heard. I just don't feel like it right now because I was actually a good listener. It was the difference between listening and interpreting the words that you were saying. So if I
Mhm.
wasn't really, and so I think that part of the reason it took me so long to realize that I was actually listening to you as though I was speaking is because one often just kind of says, oh, it's the listening, the listening, the listening. And I was actually very good at listening. And so I was a little bit thrown off the scent when I realized, oh, I'm not really listening to you as a man. I'm listening to you through a female filter.
And
So
really taking it in and
yeah, and so
receiving it.
so that's why I feel like I wonder to what extent that kind of delayed kind of my realizing this in our relationship, and also why you might have felt frustration. Because if I was just someone who just didn't listen, you could very easily pin feeling frustrated on, oh, she doesn't listen. But what do you do when someone's listening and they don't seem to be hearing you?
Well, here's all right. So I want to, and this transition is nice. I want to go to kind of what I wish I had been able to do, and I think it will dovetail in an interesting way. The main thing that strikes me is I'm confident, and it's still surely true now. I thought I was a better listener than I was. You were just simply right. I mean, just you are a good listener. From the beginning, you were more inclined in that direction and better at it, had more of a natural sense for it. And I didn't know what I didn't know. I didn't know that I was not a good listener. In fact, I kind of consider myself to be kind of a sensitive guy that was aware of relationships. And so I wasn't at all aware here that this was something that I was particularly going to need to work on. And so I have total confidence that there's the, again, this is where it might have been helpful for someone to say, really, wherever you come from, whatever you've done up to this point, this is going to be a very serious thing that you're really going to have to learn. You're going to have to learn the difference between, in individual ways between you and your spouse, and particularly coming to recognize her as a woman. And I was not alert to, sure, you know that there's quote, couples have problems in communication. I didn't think that was going to be us.
Mhm.
And so I went along. I didn't realize I wasn't hearing you. Probably in some certain important ways, I probably was being heard more than I was hearing. But to the extent I wasn't being heard, I probably wasn't even aware of that. You know what I think interestingly started, where did the problem start then? If I was just going along, I wasn't particularly feeling not
Mhm.
heard. I think the problem started, and I wonder how common this is, when you started to enunciate that I wasn't hearing you. That's where our communication problems, I think, started.
Meaning our experience of the fact that our communication was a
Right.
problem
In other words,
for you.
exactly. In other words, yeah, well, there were problems. You can have problems, and I know that you have problems. So something ignorance is bliss, maybe. Then
Sorry for disabusing you.
all of a sudden, you're pointing these things out, and it's kind of like, well, what are you talking about? I was unaware of having a problem.
Mm.
So, I mean, what was my direct answer going to be here? My direct answer is, I wish I had learned earlier on. This is going to sound trite, how much I have to learn from you, slash, how much I was going to have to work to be able to hear you. I didn't think, honestly, and again, that's the two related points. They're distinct. This aspect of, I loved you very much. I thought you had wonderful thoughts. I didn't particularly have a sense that in marriage, part of the central gifts of marriage is that you'll only come to see certain things precisely through the insight of your spouse. And so if I were to kind of put it more broadly and kind of philosophically, what do I wish that had seen? I wish I had seen God's natural plan for this is there's a whole set of things that I, as a man, as a husband, as the individual that I am that's married to you, that the way it's designed for me ever to come to see them is going to be through learning them from you, or seeing them through your eyes, having my vision directed towards it by yours. And that includes obviously both things about yourself, things about the world, and things about me.
Mm.
There's a whole set of things that I didn't think I had a self-knowledge problem, but I did. I didn't know I need to learn about me from you.
Mhm.
I didn't know I had a problem in understanding you, but I was only really going to learn about you by really listening to you.
Mhm.
And then to top it all off, I mean, here I am, Mr. Kind of Philosophy Man, thinking that, my profession is to think deep thoughts about the world and then teach about them. Key aspects of the world, even just out there, that through, I mean, by now I could say the feminine genius through feminine eyes. I mean, at this point, we don't have to say at this point whether it's feminine eyes, it's your eyes. It's now become very clear to me that in all those ways, I needed to really, in our relationship, stop and listen. Otherwise, I would not see key things I need to see.
It's the point that you're making about seeing that through listening, seeing something more than what you have hitherto seen. It's a little bit sounds like that's the point that I'm making. I felt like I understood and I knew. And I didn't realize that what listening to you consisted in is seeing it through your eyes.
Mm.
Because you're my husband, it's going to be through a masculine perspective, which to me is very unfamiliar. It's actually not how I view the world. And so it takes a kind of listening. I think it would be good for us to say, what do we mean by listening? Because obviously it's more than just the words coming into our ears. That listening has, well, let me just give a little definition. You tell me if you think that this works. It's opening yourself to receive the other. So it's not just the words that they're saying, because in my case, I was hearing your words, but I was actually not using them as kind of a means of conveying you to me. I was
Mhm.
taking them as words, which then I digested and saw the world or what you were saying through my own eyes. Whereas really what you were saying is listening consists in allowing the person to express their inner person through the words that they're speaking to. You have to use words. I mean, although I guess you can hear all kinds of things your spouse is saying through their body language and things like that, but primarily we're talking about talking right now. It's really about having the receptivity to receive your spouse on the words that they're speaking.
I like that. And just a couple of thoughts in my mind. I don't want to lose them, but it's a very important ability to be able to see it as they see it, hear it as they are saying it.
Mhm.
And if you don't know, in some sense, we're always listening through our filter. But if we're not made aware that we have to be careful of that filter and be always not in a self-flagellating, scrupulous way or fearful way, but just always being aware, am I really hearing? And by the way, I have heard people go both ways on, they were listening, but did they hear me?
Mm.
Or they take those two words and they switch them. They heard me, but were they listening?
Yes,
So
yes. Yeah,
honestly,
yeah.
I don't care which way we do
Yeah.
it on that.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
to me, the bottom line is, let's just say, really listening, really hearing.
Sure.
As far as I'm concerned, we can just kind of
Yeah.
do them both. And I think the
Yeah.
point that's being brought out here is, it's hard to express that, but this, where else would you particularly learn this than in a spousal relationship
Mhm.
of, of seeing it, and it's interesting how we go back and forth between eyes and ears, and the kind of seeing and hearing, they're so deeply intertwined. Kind of when we're really listening, we're considering it through their vantage point. And that's something that takes practice. And in love is what particularly moves you to do that. And that's why
Mhm.
in marriage, it's the perfect
Context. Yeah.
opportunity to do it, though it's still very difficult because it takes courage, it takes patience, takes effort. In a certain sense, it's painful. You and I have a common mentor right now, one of whose very big themes is, are you really entering into what the thought process of the other person is? This has been coming up a lot in how we interact with our children. He stops us short. He says, well, have you really asked your child? Have you really taken the time to listen to your child so you know what the child's thought process is rather than just thinking you kind of already know where the child's coming from? Well, isn't this the exact same thing here? I was listening. I didn't think I'd have any. I understood the meaning of the words, but I wasn't entering into your thought process.
Mhm.
And what does it take to do that? It
Mhm.
it takes in any case an understanding that that has to be intentionally done.
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that struck me, you said, "What a perfect place to do this," but it's perfect. Marriage is perfect. It's perfect because you see with the eyes of love, which helps you do true listening. But I wonder if also another part of reason that marriage is the perfect context to do this in, because the permanence of marriage. You have to figure it out. You've got to figure out how to do this. And so you keep trying, you keep trying. I'm just grateful that we've had 30 years to figure it out, because it's taken every second of 30 years for us to work through this. And of course, we're going to
Make a
keep
little bit of
growing,
progress
and we're
anyway.
going to
Yeah.
keep growing. And I don't know if now is the right moment to say this, but there have been a lot of points in our marriage that have been exceedingly painful on account of an inability to communicate with one another. I mean, genuinely, I think those are the circumstances I'm referring to when I say no one can hurt you as much as your spouse, because your spouse is where it really matters and where you really desire to be seen and received. And so I think difficulties in listening and communication sometimes constitute the most extremely painful moments in your marriage. And it's really worth working through them, doing the work that it takes to try to understand, why were we not able to communicate to our spouse? Why was our spouse not able to listen?
I mean, you said a very powerful line when you said, "Well, you have to figure this out." Have to means there's a kind of necessity here. This is a little bit of a scary point, but let me to get philosophical for a moment. There's a couple kinds of necessity. One kind of necessity is simply in an absolute sense has to happen. There's no other alternative, or there's it has to happen if you're going to achieve a certain end.
Mm,
And I think it's the latter here.
of
In other
course. Yeah.
words, you can still have a marriage where there's poor communication,
Mhm.
where in certain ways, spouses, one, the other, both, have more or less given up. And so you have to figure this out if our marriage is going to be what it should be, or,
Mhm.
or, or what we would most want it to be. And maybe this is an important moment to stop and say, look, when I lecture on friendship and connect to marriage and talk about a marriage is a great context to grow in friendship, I always want to point out sometimes in God's great providence, you'll have a marriage that's a true marriage where the deeper aspects of friendship just don't happen. It's still a real marriage. It's still a gift, but it's a particular kind of cross. In certain
Mhm.
ways, it won't be perhaps ever what you reasonably would have wanted it to
Mm.
be. Sometimes that's the way it is in divine providence. We're talking about life is serious. We're talking about very deep matters here. And in any case, right now, we're sharing kind of our experience of things that have taken us a long time. And frankly, I hope we have at least another 30
Mm. Agreed.
because that will be they'll still be more on these very exact same things.
Absolutely.
At least now they're more conscious.
Mm.
At least now we're more aware. But thank you, Lord, for the gift of time, and that we can just keep trying.
Mm.
But in any case, sometimes it's going to be the case. You and I know we talk to people where someone says something like, "Well, it just seems my spouse. Not only does my spouse not hear me, but she can't hear that he doesn't hear." And this is the
Mhm.
classic kind of Socratic point: the worst ignorance or blindness is blindness of your blindness.
Mm.
It just we're trying to convey that we don't feel heard, but the other person understands the words that you don't feel heard, but just can't quite get it. Well, there isn't any magic potion. There's no silver bullet for that. We can take that to prayer, and we just persevere. in trying gently out of love, not yelling and screaming out of frustration, although understandably at times we feel like we've come
Mhm.
to that. And just, I'm going to ask you again to try to look, because there's an aspect of me that I really just would love you to see.
And maybe before we go on to the next question, just kind of thinking about marriages where there seems to be a disparity in that regard of maybe the other person, it's not really even unwilling, but can't for whatever reason, see wounds or whatever, prevent them from actually being able to meet you at that
Right.
level. I think even in that circumstance, even if the person can't hear or can't listen, to be able to say to their spouse, I'm sorry, I can't. I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you. I'm sorry, I'm not listening to you. No, I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you, but I'm always going to be willing to listen. So, in other words, that the
Or try.
intention is,
No, try.
yes,
Yeah.
I'm just going to keep listening, even if I'm not understanding the import of your
That's
words.
a
I'm not
great
being able
point.
to put it all together. For whatever reason, I'm completely incapable of doing the computing that's necessary for me to put together a big picture of what you're saying. I'm sorry, I can't do that. And I just want to tell you that I'm willing to. Just being willing
That's a huge
is
thing.
makes a
It
huge
should always
difference.
be in our
And
power
still
by
there
the
would be
grace
the
of God.
suffering of not the commensurateness in a true friendship, but it's a completely different kind
It
of
is.
suffering.
That's a real step. That's a real step. All right. The next question.
Mhm.
What would you have wanted to receive from me? How was I not hearing you that I could have been hearing you?
Mhm. It's hard to answer that because there's so many. No, I'm joking.
It's
Um,
probably true.
so, and I think back, and this is even to a certain extent now, even the case. Very often, when I'm saying something, the things that it really matters to me that you hear are things that are hard, and I feel that you so badly wanted everything to be right and good that it was almost like you were. It was more than you could bear to hear me say that I wasn't happy or that I was hurting in some way. And that mechanism of not being able to bear that I was suffering kind of just drew down the blinds. So I often felt like when you weren't hearing me, it wasn't like from a lack of capacity, but it was almost like I just can't go there. So, especially I would imagine for a man, when a lot of the things that I was telling you about that were hard for me had to do with raising the children, being at home by myself all the time, not sleeping at night, whatever, all the different difficulties that are connected to, or sufferings that are connected to parenting in the modern world. Our home was the place that you were trying to create as a safe, lovely, beautiful, happy place for us. And children are a part of that. And there are a lot of vicissitudes that go with that. To hear that I was suffering on account of that, of course, you could have heard that and said, well, let me free you from that. We will just send all the children to boarding school and, you can have your days be free. Like, so in a certain sense, but you kind of knew that that wasn't a viable answer because
Uh,
it's not what would have been good for me. It's not what would have been good for the
uh,
children. And frankly, you knew that's not what I was asking for, but you maybe didn't have an answer. There was no way to provide relief for those areas of suffering. And so to manage that, I just felt like it wasn't sinking in. And so I guess in shorthand to say, to feel like I was heard in that situation would be to enter into the suffering and bear it with me. So it was feeling unheard because in the end, I ended up being alone in the suffering because you couldn't fix it. You didn't go into it with me. Where really what I just
all
needed you
right.
to do is say, "That's really hard."
I am so sorry. It's awful. It's awful. I'm really sorry, dear.
It's gotten better.
Well, praise the Lord for that. But here's the thing: this is very striking, and to some extent, this is a version. Everyone has their own version of the "it's not about the nail," or put otherwise, the proverbial, which I think is worth revisiting. The woman is not looking for the problem to be solved. I can't speak for all men, but and that definitively was a real feature here that I can feel it in my bones right now. When you would say those things that were hard for you, I had the sense there's nothing I can do to change that. Is which from perhaps from a genuine feeling of it's really hard for me to not be able to fix that for you,
Mhm.
but leads to this horrible situation then of my kind of, and again, I'm sure I listened or heard in some way, like, yeah, 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 yeah. But it was too, you're absolutely right. I mean, I feel it in what you're saying. It's true. I didn't, and I just have to take responsibility for that. I didn't do what you needed to be done, namely to enter into it and just say, oh my gosh, this is so, so, so hard. In retrospect, It's like, just intellectually, why couldn't I have just done that? It
Mhm.
makes so much sense for me to just say, just to enter it into you, sweep you off your feet and say, I'm so sorry. This is so hard for you. And you're not alone. I know this is crazy hard and I can't make it go away. We can't make it go away, but I know it's so hard for you. And let's just be in this together.
Mhm.
I mean, when you say this out loud, it's like, why couldn't we just have done that?
Yeah, but as you're
Or
saying that,
I
I
do
think
that.
I think I know
Why couldn't
why
I have
you
done
couldn't
that?
do that, because I wasn't just sharing with you that it was hard. It was a little bit sharing it with you as a challenge. What are you gonna do about it? And if you can't do anything about it, then you're responding to the challenge. You know what I mean? So it's like if I were just so I was thinking
Mm,
about this a lot. The listening is is sometimes conditioned by how the person is speaking, how the other person is speaking. And I think in the case of kind of unloading on you, so to speak, it's not just saying, "Oh, this is so hard, this is so hard." And I wonder if that's why sometimes maybe part of your reason to not just be able to enter into it with me was like, I know that your thought process might have been, I know this is really hard. If we change our attitude, it won't be as hard. And that's something that's in everybody's power, right? So in a certain sense, to just go in with me and go, "Oh,
mm,
I'm so sorry. That really stinks. That really stinks. That's so hard. That's so hard," feels like you are saying to the person, yes, where you are is a terrible place. And you're right. It is a terrible place. That really stinks. I guess that's the end of the play,
mhm.
which is like an awful ending, right? So how do you move forward from that? So it's complicated. It's not just not
Well, this is
hearing,
very striking to me.
but it's
I think you,
complicated.
you just really gave a new angle that it is really important, I think, to understanding this aspect. Very often, when I think about the proverbial thing of why don't men just get it, that they just need to enter into the wife needing to be heard, right? But you have interestingly pointed out something that also immediately strikes home to me is maybe other women could learn from this that you reasonably were feeling, I can't, Sean, just enter into this and suffer with me. That's very reasonable. But life is complicated. There was perhaps an aspect where you were also not just asking to be heard, but you were complaining.
Mm,
And to the extent that you're complaining, this surely is a normal part of it, particularly if a man hears a complaint. Again, I don't have to universalize myself to a man. If I hear a complaint, then especially I feel like that is asking me to fix it.
mhm,
And so here I hear a complaint about something that I can't fix. So to some extent, then I'm over here thinking, dear, complaining is the wrong
mm,
answer because it's not helpful to complain about what can't be changed. This is just what's given to us. And so I'm over here just experiencing, hey, look, isn't this what we signed up for? And so here you are kind of challenging me with the complaint. So that drives me away and makes it very hard for me to, like I said, to say, "Oh, but I'm so sorry." So to what extent might it be the case that at times women, I'm not saying this in an accusatory way, but I'm just seeing something in what you just said. They're wondering why their husband can't enter into with them, but at the same time, they are kind of slapping him in the face,
mhm,
saying, in some sense, you done messed up
mhm.
because this stinks.
Yeah, this is really, I'm really glad we're talking about this because at the time, many years ago, we were seeing a counselor who was the first one who pointed this out because we realized that we had a tremendous amount of tension when I would bring my issues or my difficulties at the end of the day to you. And you would just kind of shut down because, like, well, I can't take this. And of course, one of the explanations is you've had a long day at work and you come home and then your wife just piles it on you. And I felt, and so the way this counselor described it, the word he used is he didn't say complaining. He actually said transferring anger. So he said it would be one thing if you were just sharing with John. You need to be sharing with John your difficulties instead of transferring anger on him. And I thought, oh, okay, oh, great. This is going to solve all
And
our
that means, in a
problems.
sense, being angry at
Yeah.
me.
And I thought to myself, oh, great. This is such a great distinction. This is going to solve all our problems. And then I just couldn't figure out how to not have my suffering have this complete poison of anger when I would share it with you. I would be
Right.
telling you
That's
things that were
very
hard
hard.
during the day. And I'd be like, I'm doing it. I'm transferring anger. I don't know what else to do. And gosh darn it, it feels so good to just transfer anger on him right now. So I will confess that it had a certain sense of feeling good. And I'm just, as you're speaking, I'm thinking back on that time and I'm wondering, because you're talking about women who have a tendency to complain toward their husbands. I think this is kind of a universally experienced situation. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to improve our communication. I didn't want to be transferring anger. I didn't know how to do that. Right now, it's occurring to me. I wonder if part of the reason I couldn't do it without transferring anger on you is because I was actually angry at you. I was holding you responsible for the circumstances and conditions in my life that were making me suffer. And in a certain sense, isn't that almost kind of an intuition about first authority in the home? If man is the initiator, he is the one who asked you and invited you into this situation, you're going to hold him responsible. So I think there's something that's an intuition for something real and good. And maybe because every time we talked about it, I was angry at you again and transferring anger. Is it possible it was because you were listening to me and not realizing what I need to do right now is take responsibility for the situation? You never took responsibility. You listened, you might try to fix the problem, but did you take responsibility for the fact that you had invited me into this life that was going to have all these aspects to it, that there would be nothing we could do about it? It was just going to be hard for me. Seems to me that's a very hard thing to do.
And the tables just turned again.
How's
I thought
that?
I thought I was just going to succeed in showing this a problem in you.
Oh, no, my dear. No, it's the reason that strikes me right now as we're talking about it is the whole notion of man as initiator in marriage and in the household is a very strong and profound point that you bring up in your LifeCraft work. And it has really struck me, people aren't really talking about that. Men are craving to experience and feel what it means to be a man. And I think assuming responsibility and carrying the burden of responsibility throughout is part of what a man needs to experience in order to experience himself as a man. But that comes with accepting the responsibility. So even if your wife is pounding on you in anger, are you man enough to take it and say, at least interiorly to yourself, this is what comes of my initiating this relationship. And so I have to hold her in my arms and say, that is so hard. Let's get creative and see what we can do to relieve what we can. Or would it even be different if you had said, wow, this is what comes of what I invited you to do with me. I don't know if I can really change that for you, but I just want you to know I'm in it with you. Or I didn't even realize when I asked you that it was going to be so hard on you. And now I see what I'm asking of you. And I just want you to know we're doing this together, baby.
Wow. Would that we had been able to do that. Would that I had been. So here's the thing. This is astounding. That last insight of yours was amazing. And it's prompted something that I think you'll accept as a taking it further. And it's no way a tit for tat trying to turn tables here. Because, of course, at the end of the day, the whole point is it's beautifully designed that we are in it together and we do have to take mutual responsibility. And here's the thing that strikes me. I think you're right. So I could have then looked here and rather than even kind of once being told by the counselor, well, we got this transfer of anger thing, which to some extent freed me to kind of go, yeah, no wonder I can't just enter into it with you because you're over here obviously getting angry at me as though this whole thing is my fault. And now you're bringing out this interesting aspect of how there's kind of almost like an intuition under there. Well, there's some important truth, in the case, some very important kernel of truth in a woman having a sense of he has gotten me into this in some sense, to put it colloquially. Now, but let's try to find the deep inner harmony that ultimately is surely what God's plan is here. I think you already know where I'm going.
Yeah, I'm really excited.
I think this might work. I hope I'm going where you think I'm going.
Well, if not, I'll add my sense.
So I'm sure you will anyway. That yes, there was a great moment. If let's say I do exactly what you just said, it would look like this. All right, I'm feeling the anger coming towards me, but I can understand why the anger is coming towards me to some extent. Where else is she supposed to put it? So rather than just being completely put off by that, although it is putting off, that I say, dear, like you said, I'm just trying to say it again. I mean, something like, I'm just so grateful that you are willing to do this, that you said yes. I didn't even realize in proposing to you. I didn't realize when we conceived these children. I didn't realize all that was going to be demanded of you. And now I see it more clearly. And I completely understand why this is so hard, why you might feel overwhelmed, why you feel angry right now, because this is demanding so much of you. There's not something wrong with you that you feel overwhelmed right now. And so I'm going to take first responsibility. I invited you into this. So I take responsibility.
But
But, dear, not that this is the
remember,
moment
yeah,
necessarily to get hyper philosophical, meaning when we were having that conversation. Because at that point, I think I should just hug you. And maybe you go with that for a while.
but of course I am
But,
married to a philosopher.
but with a sense that first responsibility does not, of course, mean sole
Exactly.
responsibility.
It's not absolute.
And yes, I did ask you to marry me, but with due respect, last time I checked,
You
you said
said
yes.
yes.
So
That's
is
assuming a
this
joint
element of
responsibility.
coming back
Yeah,
to you and saying,
totally.
baby, I know I asked you to sign up for this, but we did sign up and
Yeah.
we signed up together as equal partners in this. Yes, I
And
have
now
first
we can do it together.
responsibility. So I am going to ask you to recognize that it's no one wants to be angry at himself, right? So it's
Mhm,
easy for you to be angry at me,
mhm,
but actually, it would almost be more just if you were angry at us
mhm,
because
mhm,
we decided to do this. But how
mhm,
about if we try to say, at the end of the day here, there's not reason for anger.
mm,
Let's not have the difficulty of this be turned
mhm.
into anger.
Yeah,
Let's try to focus here and see the gift and receive the gift and ask the Lord to help us to realize that the suffering right now is not a punishment. It doesn't necessarily mean that anything's gone wrong. It's just part of growing us when together we together
100%.
say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And if there's anger, it can come from the fact that I, as a woman, as your wife, am not remembering that this is something we're doing together, in which case it is fitting to remind, not by, remember, you signed up for it too, but I invited you to do this. And I didn't know it was going to be hard, but I just want to say to you, I'm committed to do this together. Are you still committed to? You didn't know either what you were signing up for. And of course, it's a hard moment of discovering, holy mackerel, that's what I was choosing. You can do it. You can do it with me and I'll be here with you. And then it wouldn't be anger. And so I think that it does still require a sense that a man acknowledges his first responsibility. I love at the beginning, you've shared with me that at the beginning of Xenophon's Oikonomia, the two characters who are speaking to one another at the beginning, the man says to his wife, my father raised me to be responsible. And the woman responds to him, my mother raised me to be responsible. So the responsibility lies for both. It would be a destructive situation if the woman holds the man solely responsible. And even if the man accepted the responsibility, but accepted it as sole responsibility, it wouldn't fix the problem. And the woman would continue to be angry at him. So I think really the only way the problem can be fixed is one, by a man actually assuming responsibility, but for a woman to remember that she has it too. It's
Yeah.
actually amazing how that would have changed so many years of difficulty in our marriage if we had been able to. And also you hadn't really done the work you had done on household so far. We have just discovered so many of things through trial and error,
Right.
but if we had known that from the beginning, and when I ran into these hard moments, yeah, we didn't know we were signing up for this, but we signed up for this together. We can do it. We can do this. Then I probably would have just been sharing my suffering with you instead of transferring anger. And how many hours during the day were spent in anger before you got home?
Well, there's an awful lot there. It's just striking me. First of all, it's just a sense of gratitude that the plan is so amazing. That if you persevere, that the Lord will bring us along.
Mhm.
But everything's interconnected. One thing we haven't brought up here is that what we just talked about there is if everything is being done reasonably well, all of that could be true if the husband has not put any unfair burdens on his wife. If he's been listening to her, it still just that difficulty could have led to that whole scenario that we just said. It gets a little bit more complicated if the husband isn't having a bearing towards her in ways that he needs to in setting up this whole thing and in enacting it. Let me just tell you
Mhm.
what I'm thinking there. So, for instance, part of the challenge here is the whole situation we just talked about gets a little bit more complicated. If, for instance, let's just give one quick example. If a woman's sense is, my husband is not listening to me as regards, say, the realm of family planning, then there can be this aspect of, am I being pushed into something that I didn't sign
Sign
up
up for.
for? So
Yeah, yeah.
note how to have that kind of situation where we can really just be in it together as
Yeah.
much as we want to be in it together, this is calling for this holistic approach of the whole other area of, well, is the husband listening? I mean,
Mhm.
because honestly, another way that I was going to put the first thing I said of what I wish I had known earlier, I put it this way: how much I have to learn from you. Another way I could have put that was in the exercise of my first authority in marriage, in the household. I wish I had realized how I can only do it well if I really, really see through your eyes,
Mhm.
and we really come to, in some sense, a decision together. And to the extent that I'm not listening to you, and that we're not really together in the big decisions we make, then that does lead to, for instance, situations where, in this case, to go with the example, a wife is going to have anger where she's angry that her husband hasn't done certain things. She
Mhm.
actually has something to be directly angry at him about. It's not just, oh, sorry, dear, this is hard. We signed up for this. So that's a whole nother aspect of marital communication where we are going to have to be able to realize and hear that we haven't done well.
Mm.
We can only do so much in one conversation here.
Mhm.
I think we should move towards wrapping up. But I think on that note, I can very quickly share the thing that I was going to say, because it fits with this. It's another angle. Maybe we can talk about it more later. But what would I have wanted to see? Because I never answered
Yeah.
that question. What would I
Mhm.
want to kind of see from you more? What's been hard for me, maybe that wasn't fully there, or there could have been more, was um, when I did start to come to you with things that were hard for me, where I just wanted to say, it's very hard for me, dear, that you such and such. So often I felt like, in many ways, this is the other side. It's men and women have plenty of things in common. We both need to be heard and suffered with and
Mhm.
have a problem, not just fixed. And in here, very often, if I was saying it was very hard for me that you such and such, I feel that very often you would say, maybe start to explain it away, start to give an excuse, starts to say, or even point out, maybe not in a mean way, but, well, but dear, don't you do the same thing yourself,
Mhm.
kind of thing.
Mm.
And so right at that moment where I'm sharing that it's hard for me that you such and such, rather than you're just receiving that,
Mhm.
and as I were just saying, yeah, wow, I can imagine it would be really hard for you
Mhm.
that I such and such. That's something that I felt was somewhat lacking. Now,
Oh, I'm so sorry.
no, dear. Thank you, dear.
Actually, I just realized this
Uh,
is really hard to do this. Oh, I
Okay.
feel so
I,
bad.
but here's the thing. Of course, I also, in saying that, know that absolutely goes the other way too, right?
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
you have certainly said to me the same thing. I didn't really realize until I just said this out loud, where you say, "Can I just tell you something
Yeah.
about?"
Without it
You know,
becoming about you.
right,
Yeah.
exactly. And for my
Yeah.
giving an excuse and being kind of mad that you're mad or whatever.
Yeah.
So I mean, clearly, this is something. It's not just about the differences between man and woman. We all, from both sides, have to learn something
Mhm.
key here about being willing to enter into the suffering, accept that I have been, in some sense, a cause of
Yeah,
suffering
that's
to the
really
other
hard.
person. And it's much easier to enter into someone else's suffering when you weren't the cause
Of
of it.
course. Totally.
And so it's not a big part that we both have to learn how do we say, just kind of in many ways, it kind of gives a wrap up. Sometimes it's going to be, wow, this thing that we chose to do together, yeah, this is really hard for both of us, and wow, isn't this hard? But then even this harder thing of, yet, given how I have failed you in various ways, you have suffered in ways that you, in some sense, shouldn't have had to suffer. Or in any
Mhm.
case, if we don't put it that way, we could just say, I wish you hadn't have had
Yeah.
to suffer. You
They might
wouldn't
not have
have had
suffered
to
that.
suffer
Yeah.
if I had, in some way, more had my act
Yeah.
together.
Done something
And I
different.
just
Yeah.
have to accept that I am the cause of suffering to you.
Yeah. That's very hard.
And this ends up being a problem of communication, of listening, because it's something so hard to hear. We don't really let ourselves hear it.
We've kind of adverted to a lot of the difficulties here and we've shared with the listeners the ways in which we haven't felt heard. I just feel like it might be good to say in closing, or ask the question, what do we do when we feel like we're not being heard by our spouse? And I just feel like I would like to conclude by saying, you keep speaking. Like if you
Amen.
feel like your spouse isn't hearing, you keep speaking. And you do this the scrutiny that is really you're only able to do one kind of scrutiny very well, which is scrutinize yourself. Is there a way that I could be saying this that would be making it easier for my spouse to hear? And so don't just keep saying the same thing over and over again. Although sometimes that's all it is, because
Right.
sometimes your
Don't give
spouse
up.
isn't hearing because they can't at that moment. And a year from now, 2 years from now, a week from now, things might be different, and they hear it and they feel like you said it to them for the first time. In the meantime, you've been saying it for the last 5 years. You can't lose heart, because ultimately it's about sharing one another's life together more deeply. So you can never stop speaking.
Amen. Amen. And may I just then add, and of course, never stop speaking and never
Stop.
stop trying to hear, because that's something always in our power. We keep speaking. I think that's a key admonition. On the flip side, the other thing that's in our power is, how can I listen better?
Sure. Yeah.
And might that be the key here that will help the other hear me if I'm willing? And that's where it's 100, right? You don't wait. You don't wait. Well, if he's not listening, the Lord to help us. And at the end of the day, is our relationship with God about learning to listen
Mm.
and learning to see where we haven't been listening. And of course, to speak back also, because life is in communication.
Mm.
Oh, dear.
Tomorrow's a new day. Thank goodness.
By the grace of God, and it's a bright one.
It is.
Great being with you all. Thanks for tuning in this episode of The Intentional Household. If you've enjoyed this, please like, subscribe, and leave a rating or review. If you have any topic requests, please send them to lifecraftgroup@gmail.com. For our Wednesday reflections, free courses, reading groups, and live events, please visit life-craft.org.